Welcome to the Pursuit of Progress, where we focus on small daily improvements to fuel growth. Each week, we explore ideas and strategies to boost your mindset, skills, and life. If you're driven to improve and live with purpose, you are in the right spot. Now, let's get after it. All right, you guys. Well, welcome back to another episode of the Pursuit of Progress. I'm a solo podcaster today. My partner in crime, Ben, won't be joining me today. So, on this episode, I wanted just to do a little different approach and just share something that's been on my mind a lot recently when it comes to self growth and, more importantly, just productivity. So, this topic today, I really think is going to shift your mindset about time, work, and just the potential that we all have to achieve more in life. For so many of us, the traditional 9 to 5 work schedule dominates our thinking. We feel like, once we're done with the day is basically over. It's just, I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of people that just really abide by this stereotype or the norm in society of the 9 to 5. But, what if I told you that the real opportunity for building wealth, like, for example, through real estate investing or even just through starting any sort of side hustle, it really lies in that time outside the 9 to 5 window. So, in this episode today, I'm going to show you just how much time you truly have outside of your full time job and how, by dedicating even a very, very small portion of that time every single day, you could really build something incredible. And whether that's a side hustle, maybe a passive income stream, or even just a real estate empire through, real estate investing. So, the best part about all of this, I just want to really reiterate to you guys, is you don't need to quit your job or completely change your lifestyle to make this happen. So today, we're going to break down just how many days you're actually really working in a year, how much free time exists that most people do not take advantage of, and just what the power of compounding effort can do if you dedicate just 1 or maybe 2 extra hours a day to something that could truly transform your future. So this first part that I want to talk with you guys today is just, again, about the reality of this 9 to 5 and how different it really is once you have this mindset shift on how much time really is available to you. So think about it this way. How many days a year do you think you're working? Most of us think that we're working almost all of the time, but just for, sake here, let's actually do the math together. So there's 52 weeks in a year, and most of us get weekends off. So that's 2 days per weekend, which adds up to 104 days automatically off from work each year. So think about that. That's more than a quarter of the year that you're not working, just in weekends alone. Now let's add in holidays. So the average person in the US gets around 10 to 15 holidays per year. So if we add those holidays on top of weekends, we're looking at about 115 to 120 days per year where you're not working at all. So that leaves roughly 245 working days, depending on how many holidays you get and whether you take vacation. So even if you're working a traditional 9 to 5, you're really only working about 2/3 of the year. So, Adam, why does this matter? Well, because once you realize how much time you're not working, you start to see this massive potential in the remaining time available. We all have these 115 to 120 days per year that most people don't maximize. In fact, I'd argue that a very, very small percentage really understand and take advantage of this. So just imagine, what you could do with just a fraction of that time, focusing on something that could build long-term wealth or extra income. So, I think there's also appropriate to say as a side note, I'm talking specifically about side hustles and other revenue streams or other ways to generate income, but you could also apply this to other things. Maybe it's just a passion of yours to learn how to play the guitar, or maybe it's, writing a book, whatever it is, you can still apply this same principle to pretty much anything. It's really more important on this episode today. I want to get across to you guys is just this idea of how much time is really out there and just hopefully helping you create this mindset shift. So I want to take this a step further though. So what if instead of thinking about your 9 to 5 as the only time you have to be productive, you started using just 1 extra hour a day to build something else? So again, let's break it down. So if you dedicate 1 hour every day, just 1 hour to something like real estate investing or your side hustle, that adds up to 365 hours in a year. Now, 365 hours, that might not sound like much at first, but think about it this way. So that's the equivalent of 45 full 8-hour workdays. So imagine if you had a month and a half to work full time just on your side hustle or your investments. That's what just 1 hour a day throughout an entire calendar year gets you. It's pretty insane when you think about it from that perspective. Now let's just talk about something even crazier. Now let's start thinking about what 2 hours a day gets you. So if you carve out 2 hours of extra time every single day, you're looking at 730 hours in a year, or the equivalent of 90 full-time workdays. That's 3 months of extra time just by setting aside 2 hours a day. So, how often do we say, I just don't have time? What I'm really trying to get across is, what I'm showing you is that if you just make the time, even 1 or 2 hours a day, you're creating a massive window of opportunity to completely change your future. A lot of my friends, myself included at times, we always talk about how hard it is to get up in the mornings. And, I've really taught myself this over the last 5 or 6 years with having a gym partner, Ben, my co-host on the podcast, just really understanding that, yeah, it sucks to get up at, 5:30 every morning. But once you're up, you're up. And you really don't have that much of a difference of how you feel throughout the day compared with waking up at 6:30 or even 7:30. A little side note, also a little tip that I'll share that I think is really beneficial if you are trying to maybe create this extra hour every single day and you want to do that by adding an hour of time in the morning, is you don't have to start so aggressively. Even starting at just 15 minutes in the morning and then building up to an hour and maybe even building up to 2 hours. But just starting off by waking up 15 minutes earlier, do that for maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks. You're going to get used to it. Your body's going to adjust, and then it's not going to have any difference of feeling from what it was prior to when you were waking up at 6 instead of 5:45 and then maybe 5:30. So anyways, just starting off with those small micro adjustments is definitely a pro tip that I recommend and definitely makes a huge difference versus just jumping in and being so aggressive where you're waking up 2 hours extra early, and you're going to burn out. So little side note there, and a little tip that I think will help you if mornings are maybe the time that you're identifying might be the only time in your day where you have this uninterrupted just time where there's no excuses. That's always going to be time available to work on your side hustle and work on whatever it is you have as your goal. So kind of going back now to this 1 hour or 2 hour and just understanding what I think is one of the best principles in all of just entrepreneurship and self-growth. And really when it comes to financial literacy as well, which is just the idea of the compounding effect and how small efforts over time add up. In fact, I might even make that the title of this episode of the podcast, because I think that is so, so, so critical just to really understand what's being said by that. So again, the compounding effect, small efforts over time add up. So here's where things start to get really exciting. So there's this concept, again, the compounding effect, and it's not just about money. What it's really more importantly about is this effort. So when you consistently put in small efforts over time, the results start to snowball. And they don't just add up linearly, they really multiply. So let's just say you're spending these extra hours every day learning about real estate investing. We'll use real estate investing as our example here. So at first, maybe you're just reading articles, watching videos, maybe listening to podcasts like this one. You're absorbing knowledge, and it feels like you're just maybe scratching the surface. But over time, those small little bits of learning, they compound. You start to connect dots. You start to understand market trends. Maybe start to develop a deep understanding of certain areas within the market that have high potential for real estate investing. You really develop this sense of just how to evaluate deals. Fast forward a few months, and that knowledge that you're starting to build up starts turning into actual action. You might find your first investment property, or maybe meet a mentor who can help guide you to that next step. So that's how these little small daily efforts really compound into something much larger. And again, it's all about just having your eye on the bigger picture and not being so focused on a day-to-day level of growth or progress. Also relating this to working out or maybe losing weight. If you have a goal of losing 20 pounds, you look at yourself today in the mirror, you look at yourself tomorrow in the mirror, you're going to look the exact same. But Fast forward a month, if you are consistently doing what needs to be done, this compounding effect after a month, all of a sudden you're like, wow, I do have results. I do see a difference or a change. And this is really how real estate investors, going back to the real estate example, this is how they grow their portfolios and really have an upper hand on the majority of people, which are not doing this and just kind of going through the monotony of life and not taking those extra sacrifices that are really needed to get ahead and give yourself a competitive advantage over others. So, you're not going to get lucky overnight as much as you think that that's how a lot of these wealthy people have been successful and have continued to grow their portfolios. What it's really about is just showing up and showing up consistently every single day and putting in the work. There's no secret sauce. There's no, romanticizing on this topic. It's pretty simple. And it's just crazy, though, how something so simple is pretty difficult to execute consistently. Again, the word here, consistently. So again, this goes though for any side hustle. It's not about doing anything dramatic or just really drastic. It's about this consistency and this consistent action taken over time. Before you know it, you're going to move mountains. So I just wanted to really hit that home and just make a big part of this episode today focused on consistency and just taking small steps every single day. And I want to also talk to us about this time and how it really is pretty easy to identify at least 1 hour, if not 2 hours a day. And the way I like to look at this, I'm going to take a little different approach here for this next part of the episode and just talk about how there's so much time beyond that 9 to 5 workday. Real freedom exists in the off hours. I think one of the biggest myths people buy into is that financial freedom or side hustles require a ton of risk or just a complete total career change. In my opinion, that is not true whatsoever. Real estate investing and honestly almost every side hustle out there can be done outside of the traditional 9 to 5 workday. Think about it. Real estate investing, it doesn't follow a strict schedule. You don't have to be working from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. to find good deals or make smart investments. Most real estate investors are doing this stuff in their off hours. They're looking for deals in the evenings, running the numbers on properties, maybe over the weekend, networking with potential partners, maybe during their lunch breaks or after work. And that's just, the beauty of side hustles or real estate investing is it's flexible. And I think flexibility really allows you to get creative and I think to be inspired to kind of take it to the next level. You don't need to quit your job or disrupt your life. You just need to carve out some of this extra time in your day. And I also will say that I've had a lot of friends and mentors and just people that I've known over the years that have been so focused on their side hustle that they've quit their primary 9 to 5 day job potentially prematurely. And what's happened in a lot of the cases is that's really put them in a vulnerable, scary position because you need that, that income coming in, that reliable income to not just totally sink the ship, until your side hustle is really taking over and your number one source of income, or at least enough of an income that you can maybe start to reduce your 9 to 5 hours or that level of commitment. I just have so many friends and just people, and I've actually done this myself too. When I've been entrepreneurial in the past with starting a business where, you kind of go off one direction too quickly and it can really put you in a tight spot. So just make sure you're really thinking through any drastic changes you make when it comes to your primary day job and your side hustle. When the average, person is just kind of winding down, maybe at like 6 p.m., what are they doing? They're turning on Netflix, maybe spending, a couple hours watching TV, just not really doing anything productive. And I get it. I need that time too in my life just to kind of unwind and unplug and just not think about, stuff, work, life, just having that kind of distraction. So I'm not saying that needs to be completely eliminated, but let's just, again, use that 1 hour of Netflix as an example. What else could you be doing with that hour? You could be spending it on your, your education, your self growth, your self improvement through, learning the real estate market, building a business, whatever it may be. Again, over time, that commitment is really going to put you miles ahead of anybody else. We all have the same 24 hours in a day. It's all about how you use them. And when you really start viewing your time outside of this 9 to 5 as your true window of opportunity, your complete life can change and you really have a different perspective on, how productive you can be and, how much opportunity exists out there if you're just willing to make these small sacrifices. these numbers can dramatically change your life and really add up over time. So again, I want to use a few more real number examples just to really make a dramatic example of how awesome this can be if you follow this pretty simple framework. So over a year, we talked earlier about over a year, that's if you did 1 hour a day, that's 45 work days in an entire year. If you just do 1 extra hour a day, if you do 2 hours a day, that ends up being 730 hours, which is 90 full work days. Now think about what 90 full days of extra effort could do for you. That's a quarter of the year, like I said earlier, that you could be putting towards, this side hustle or, whatever it is that you're trying to work on. But what's even crazier is when you look at the long-term impact of that. So let's just say you work those 2 extra hours every day for 5 years. So by the end of that time, you've put in 3,650 hours towards your side hustle. That's equivalent of about 450 full-time workdays. So over 5 years, you're essentially giving yourself more than an extra year of entire full-time effort towards building your future without quitting your job or disrupting your life. That's the power of compounding effort. Small changes in your daily routine can lead to massive results over time. Another phrase that I really like to remind myself about, however, I think there's a lot of mixed opinions on this, is the mindset or just the quote of work smarter, not harder. One of my good friends and mentors, Will Grimes, who's I also have listened to him talk about this before, and work smarter, not harder. What about work smarter and harder? But for today, I just want to kind of dig into this a little bit more. So, I think the biggest hurdle for most people is that mental block. We're so conditioned to think about work as this 9 to 5 thing that takes up all of our energy and time. But the truth is, you can work smarter, more so than the harder part of this. If you look at the time outside your 9 to 5 as an opportunity rather than dead space, everything changes. It's not about working longer hours. It's about working strategically during the time you have. And it's about dedicating that focused effort to something that can actually create financial freedom in the long run. And again, the best part is you don't need to start with a ton of time. Even 1 extra hour a day, it can make that huge difference. If you stretch that to 2 or 3 hours on some days, you're fast tracking your progress. And the key again is that consistency and just focusing your efforts on high leverage activities that move the needle. We've done another episode recently called the Pareto principle or the 80-20 rule. And that's kind of going along the same guidelines that, 80% of your results, 80% of your output is really done through 20% of your actions. So working on more important, high level, more strategic tasks is what's going to move the needle. So if you haven't yet really done an audit of your day-to-day life, maybe that's worth doing and just seeing, do like almost like a day or a week, maybe even 2 weeks, like an audit where every day you just write out what you're doing, every day, every task that you're doing. Once you've had enough days, enough data to review, you can start to see areas where, you might be either wasting time or just doing tasks that could be delegated to somebody else. If you're spending an hour in the morning just kind of sifting through your emails, and maybe that's something that you could hire a virtual assistant to help train them to do, and it takes them that same hour, but you're paying them $5 instead of using an hour out of that 9 to 5, 8-hour time frame. Not only are you going to kind of delegate that and take that off of your plate, you're going to conserve that energy that takes and be able to apply that to something else that you've identified as being much more productive and a higher level of value to yourself. So think about that, because I think that's another way to maybe get started on this. In addition to adding this 1 or 2 hours to your day for your side hustle, also for your day job, for that 9 to 5, just think about that a little bit too, just how you might be able to be more productive through what tasks you're focusing most of your energy and efforts on. Hope that helped you guys. I know that was kind of a brief, quick little kind of rant or just like a one-on-one with you guys, just talking through something that I think is really valuable, something that I'm trying to implement myself. You really, again, just want to reiterate that the time you have outside of that 9 to 5 is your biggest untapped resource, in my opinion. And whether you're looking to invest in real estate, maybe just start a different side hustle, anything that you're passionate about, it's not about quitting your job or sacrificing your income. It's about using your time more wisely. Just remember, that 1 hour a day can compound into something very incredible. 2 hours a day can completely transform your life. And that's like as the example I use, 5 years, you're getting an entire extra year of output just from that 2 hours a day. It all comes down just to what you choose to do with your time and what you really focus your energy on, what you find in your life that you're passionate about, and just putting all of your effort into that and just being, very diligent and consistent. And if you're ready to start making the most of your time and you want some guidance on how you personally can get started with real estate investing specifically, or really just building any sort of side hustle, I would love for you guys to connect with me. Schedule a free 30-minute strategy session. I have a link on all of my social media, or you can shoot me an email. It's just adam@adamsellsdenver.com. I would love just to, maybe jump on a 30-minute Zoom with you and just kind of help maybe share a few suggestions after learning a little bit more about your specific situation. And on that, we'll obviously dig deeper, talk about some of these options that you might have. And I'll definitely just give you at least one, if not multiple, actionable steps you can take today to really get started on this. If you guys are interested, though, more in the real estate side of things with buying or selling or investing, I have a ton of free resources on my website. Also, you can check those out and download them. Just adamsellsdenver.com. So check those out. I'm going to leave it there for today. Again, sorry that Ben couldn't join us, but I'm looking forward to having him back next week on an all new episode of the Pursuit of Progress podcast. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you guys next week.